The scene starts right in the middle of chaos. A teenage boy lies still on the hot pavement of a basketball court. His skin is pale, his lips turning blue. A man in jeans and a plain t-shirt, Diego, a paramedic, is kneeling over him, pumping the boy's chest hard and fast, sweat running down his face. His hands move like he's done this 1,000 times before, because he has. Every second counts. A few feet away, a crowd of kids and neighbors stand frozen, some filming, some crying. Suddenly, a voice cuts through the noise, sharp and angry. "Get your hands off that boy or I'll cuff you myself!" Everyone turns. A man in cargo shorts, a tactical vest way too tight for him, and a plastic badge that says HOA Security is stomping toward Diego. His hand is already reaching for a pair of handcuffs clipped to his belt. Diego doesn't even glance up. He just keeps pressing, counting under his breath, fighting to keep the boy alive. Right here, the story freezes for a second. The camera would stop on Diego's hands locked over the boy's chest, the security guy's shadow falling over him. And then the narrator's voice drops low, serious. How did we get here? Because this isn't just a story about a boy who needed help. It's about what happens when the wrong person tries to take control at the worst possible moment. And how that one choice would set off a chain reaction nobody could stop. Before everything went wrong, Diego wasn't trying to be a hero. He wasn't even supposed to be outside. He had just finished carrying a heavy box of plates into his sister's new condo. She had finally bought a place in a quiet little neighborhood called Pine Ridge. You know the type. Every lawn perfectly cut, pastel-colored mailboxes lined up in a row, and no trespassing signs stuck in the grass every 20 feet like they were trying to keep out an army. It was the kind of place where people smiled with their mouths, but not their eyes. Diego didn't care much about that. He was only there to help his sister move in, maybe grab some pizza afterward, and call it a day. He wasn't on duty. His uniform was in his car. His ambulance was across town. But being a paramedic wasn't something he could just turn off like a light switch. It was part of who he was. He stacked the plates on the counter, wiped his hands on his jeans, and was about to ask where the next box was when he heard it. A scream, sharp and panicked, cutting through the quiet like a knife. His whole body moved before his brain even caught up. Diego had saved strangers before, but nothing he had ever done could have prepared him for what was about to happen just down the street. The scream yanked Diego out of the kitchen like a hook. He didn't stop to think. His legs were already moving before his mind could even ask why. He sprinted down the sidewalk, past the neat flower beds and the trimmed hedges, heading straight for the basketball court where the noise had come from. There, lying flat on the cracked asphalt, was a teenage boy. Maybe 16, maybe 17. His body was still. His chest wasn't moving. His lips had a blue tint that sent a cold shot straight through Diego's heart. A group of kids stood around him, frozen, wide-eyed, as if hoping someone would magically fix everything. Diego dropped to his knees without a second of hesitation. "Call 911!" he barked, pointing at a boy gripping a phone with shaking hands. "Tell them it's cardiac arrest, male teenager, CPR in progress." His voice was sharp, not angry, controlled. The kind of voice you use when seconds matter more than anything else. He placed his hands on the boy's chest and started compressions, hard and fast. 30 pushes down, counting quietly under his breath, feeling for the rhythm he had memorized after years of training. Sweat broke out on his forehead. His arms ached after just a few rounds, but he didn't stop. This was life or death, and right now, it was death trying to win. After a set of compressions, Diego leaned down and checked for a pulse. Nothing. He pulled his backpack around and yanked out the AED, the portable defibrillator he carried everywhere, even when he was technically off duty. He ripped the pads out, stuck them to the boy's chest, and waited as the machine started charging. The kids around him watched, their faces pale and terrified. One of them sobbed into his sleeve. The AED beeped, ready to deliver a shock. Diego's heart raced, but his hands stayed steady. In a situation like this, panic was your worst enemy. There was still time to save him, but not much. And that's when the sound of tires screeching on the pavement made Diego's stomach sink. Someone else had arrived, and not someone who was there to help. The black SUV screeched to a stop just a few feet away. Diego didn't even look up at first. His whole world was the boy under his hands. The AED was almost ready to shock. He needed just a few more seconds. But then heavy boots slammed against the pavement, and a voice barked out, way too loud for the situation. "Step away from the resident, now!" Diego glanced up just for a second. Marching toward him was a man who looked like he had just walked off a cheap action movie set. Cargo shorts, a thick tactical vest strapped over a t-shirt, mirrored sunglasses even though it wasn't that sunny. A walkie-talkie bounced on his belt, next to a pair of handcuffs he clearly couldn't wait to use. His plastic badge read HOA Security, Pine Ridge. Diego turned back to the boy, ignoring him. "Medical emergency?" he called out over his shoulder, hands steady as he prepared to hit the AED shock button. "I'm a licensed paramedic. Back off and wait for EMS." But the man didn't back off. He stomped closer, face red, chest puffed out like he was about to lead a raid. "You have no right to be here," he shouted. "This is private property. You're not authorized." Diego gritted his teeth and didn't even look at him. "I'm saving his life," he said, pressing down hard on the boy's chest again, feeling how fragile the body under him was becoming. "Go stand over there if you want to help." But Rick, that was his name, he would find out later, didn't care about helping. He only cared about control. He yanked the handcuffs from his belt, the metal clinking loudly in the tense air. "Last warning," Rick growled. "Stop what you're doing or I'll place you under citizen's arrest." The seconds Diego needed were slipping away. He knew arguing wouldn't save the boy, only CPR would. So he tuned Rick out and kept going, his heart pounding in rhythm with every desperate push on the boy's chest, hoping it wasn't already too late. Diego barely had time to react. 1 second, he was pressing down on the boy's chest, counting, keeping the rhythm steady, praying for a flicker of life. And then, out of nowhere, hands grabbed him roughly by the arm. Rick yanked him backward, hard enough to pull him off balance. Diego hit the ground with a thud, the rough pavement scraping his hands. For a split second, he just stared in shock as Rick snapped the cuffs onto his wrists like he was arresting a criminal. "You're under citizen's arrest," Rick barked, loud enough that everyone around the court heard it. The kids who had been standing frozen finally broke. One of them screamed, "He was saving him! What are you doing?" Another boy ran up and started pounding on Rick's arm with his fists, but it didn't do much. Diego twisted in the cuffs, trying to get back to the boy, but it was too late. The AED was still blinking, useless now without someone to push the button. The boy's chest didn't move. His face, already pale, seemed to lose even more color. In the space of just a few moments, the lost compressions, the missed shock, everything slipped away. The boy's pulse, whatever tiny chance he had left, faded right there on the court. Diego sat helpless, knees scraped, wrists digging into the metal cuffs, and watched the boy go still. Completely still. The sirens grew louder in the distance, but they might as well have been a world away. When the first police cruiser finally pulled up, it had been 6 minutes. 6 minutes without help. 6 minutes of arguing and stupidity, and wasted time. An officer jumped out, took one look at the scene. Diego cuffed on the ground, AED blinking, a crowd of panicked kids. And his face dropped. "You arrested a paramedic?" the officer said, voice low and full of disbelief. But it didn't matter. It was already too late. The boy was gone. The video hit the internet before Diego even made it home. One of the kids had been recording the whole thing. The CPR, the shouting, the moment Rick dragged Diego away. At first it showed up on a small Reddit thread under the title, "HOA Psycho Arrests Paramedic During CPR." Within an hour, it was everywhere. The footage was raw and shaky, but it didn't need to be polished. It spoke for itself. You could hear Diego counting compressions, hear the crowd shouting, see the boy's chest stop moving. And then there was Rick, sunglasses gleaming, slapping cuffs onto the one person who was actually trying to save a life. The hashtags started flying. Circa CPR arrest. Justice for Diego. Let medics work. People didn't just watch. They got mad, really mad. Comments poured in by the thousands. "This should be criminal," one person wrote. "He had a chance until they stopped him," said another. By the next morning, the video wasn't just on Reddit. It was on Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, even the front pages of major news outlets. Cable news anchors replayed it on a loop, shaking their heads in disbelief. Everyone wanted answers. Who was the guy in the vest? Who gave him the right to stop a trained paramedic? Why wasn't Diego being praised instead of cuffed on the pavement? The anger didn't stay online either. It was growing, and it was about to explode into something way bigger than anyone at Pine Ridge could have ever imagined. Diego didn't want to talk to reporters. He didn't want to be on TV. All he wanted was to rewind time and save that kid. But deep down, he knew he couldn't just walk away. Not after what happened. Not after the world had seen it, too. He made one phone call that night, to his older brother, Alio. Alio wasn't just family. He was one of the toughest civil rights attorneys in the state, the kind of guy who knew how to take on powerful people and make them answer for what they'd done. Diego didn't even have to explain much. Alio had already seen the video. After a long pause, Alio's voice came through the line, low and steady. "We're going to bury them," he said. The next morning, Diego stood next to Alio in front of a wall of flashing cameras outside the hospital. His hands were still bruised from the cuffs. But this time, he stood tall. No shame. No fear. Alio stepped up to the microphones and didn't waste a second. "Today we are filing a $10 million lawsuit against the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association and those responsible for obstructing emergency medical care," he said. "Because no paramedic should ever be stopped from saving a life, and no family should have to bury a child because someone cared more about rules than breath." It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a warning shot. Diego wasn't a victim anymore. He was a fighter now, and he had a whole country standing behind him. It didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. A few days after the lawsuit was filed, a woman named Lena came forward. She had worked as a volunteer with the Pine Ridge HOA security team before quitting, and now she was ready to talk. Lena had proof. Real proof. She leaked a string of emails between the HOA board members and the head of security, Rick. They weren't just careless messages either. They were cold, planned, and brutal. One email from the HOA president to Rick read, "No unauthorized personnel during crisis. We must control liability and optics." Another one was even worse. "We don't care if they're licensed. If they don't live here, they don't touch our residents." Those words spread across the internet like wildfire. News channels read them out loud on TV. Newspapers printed them in big, bold letters. People couldn't believe it. The HOA wasn't worried about saving lives. They were worried about covering themselves legally. Outrage that had already been burning suddenly exploded. What kind of place cared more about protecting their image than protecting a dying kid? Commentators didn't hold back either. One called it the privatization of death, and the nickname stuck. fast. It wasn't just about Diego anymore. It was about what kind of country lets a group of neighborhood volunteers act like police without any real training. Parents, doctors, paramedics, even politicians started weighing in. This wasn't just a lawsuit now. It was a national firestorm. And Pine Ridge was standing right in the middle of it, with nowhere to hide. The fallout hit Pine Ridge like a storm nobody could stop. At first, it was just angry phone calls and a few nasty emails. But within days, the whole neighborhood was boiling over. Homeowners who had once bragged about their pretty streets and fancy gates were now furious. Property values started dropping almost overnight. People who had spent years saving for their homes watched helplessly as buyers backed out of deals. Real estate agents stopped returning calls. Nobody wanted to live in a place known for handcuffing paramedics. Outside the HOA headquarters, a glass-walled building that once looked neat and professional, protesters started gathering every day. Some carried CPR dummies painted red. Others held signs that said things like, "Rules over lives," and "He could have lived." The air smelled like sweat and anger and cardboard markers. Inside, the board tried to pretend everything was fine, but it wasn't. They couldn't even agree on what to say anymore. Meanwhile, Rick, the man at the center of it all, wasn't helping either. Instead of laying low, Rick doubled down. He showed up on random fringe podcasts, still wearing his tactical vest, ranting about outsiders and neighborhood safety. His interviews didn't make him look tough. They made him look crazy. Clips of him shouting about real Americans and fake paramedics went viral for all the wrong reasons. If Pine Ridge had any hope of fixing its image, Rick made sure to burn it to the ground first. When the courtroom doors opened, the tension was so thick, it felt like walking through smoke. Reporters lined the back wall. EMTs and firefighters came in uniform and filled every seat they could find. Diego sat at the front next to Alio, silent but steady. This was no longer just about him. It was about every first responder who had ever been told to wait while someone died. The trial moved slowly, but every second mattered. Alio didn't rush. He laid out the case like he was building a house, one brick at a time, solid and careful. He showed Diego's EMT license, his trauma kit, the AED machine still blinking from that day. He walked the jury through every move Diego had made, each one following training, following the law. When it was time, Alio played the video, the one that had shocked the country. Diego giving CPR, Rick dragging him away, the boy's chest going still. Nobody in the courtroom made a sound. Even the judge shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Karen, the president of the HOA, tried to stay calm during cross-examination. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. When Alio asked her if she understood the importance of uninterrupted CPR, she stammered, "I'm not a medical expert." Alio nodded slowly, then asked, "So why did you create rules that let someone stop a licensed paramedic from saving a dying kid?" Karen looked down at the table. She had no good answer. Then came the whistleblower, Lena. She walked the court through the leaked emails, the ugly rules about no outsiders, and the so-called training sessions Rick had run like a bad summer camp for wannabe cops. Her voice was steady, but the weight of her words crushed whatever defense the HOA had left. The final blow was the surprise witness, a retired police captain. He told the jury plainly that real officers are trained never to interfere with emergency medical care. That private security pretending to be cops was dangerous, deadly even. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth hit hard enough on its own. Rick didn't even bother to show up. His chair sat empty at the defense table, a perfect symbol of everything he had destroyed and then run from. By the end of the day, You could feel it in the room. The jury didn't just believe Diego, they were angry for him. Justice wasn't a question anymore. It was just a matter of time. When the jury came back with their decision, the whole courtroom held its breath. It didn't take long. The foreman stood up, cleared his throat, and said the words Diego had barely let himself hope for. Guilty. On every count. The HOA was ordered to pay Diego $10 million for what they had done to him, and another $2 million in punitive damages, meant to send a message that some mistakes aren't just accidents. Some mistakes cost lives. Across the aisle, Karen closed her eyes and dropped her head into her hands. There was no spinning this, no getting out of it. The court also ruled that the Pine Ridge HOA had to shut down its entire security program immediately. No more fake badges, no more clipboard warriors playing cop. If they ever wanted any kind of patrol again, it would have to be trained, licensed, and approved by real law enforcement. Outside the courthouse, Diego didn't give a long speech. He stood at the top of the courthouse steps, the wind tugging at his shirt, and said simply, "This wasn't about revenge. This was about making sure no one else loses a life because of someone else's ego." But the story didn't end there. What happened to Diego sparked something bigger. Lawmakers started paying attention. Within a month, a new bill was proposed in Congress, a bill that would make it a federal crime to interfere with licensed emergency responders. They called it Diego's Law. And across the country, real paramedics, firefighters, nurses, even people who had never needed to call 911, stood a little taller, knowing that the next time a life was on the line, the law would be on their side, not standing in their way. A few weeks after the trial ended, the basketball court where it all happened looked different. Not because of the cracks in the pavement or the worn-out hoop, but because of the crowd that filled it now. Hundreds of people stood shoulder to shoulder, holding candles that flickered softly in the evening air. At the edge of the court, right near the spot where Diego had once knelt over a boy's fading heartbeat, there was now a small bronze plaque. It read, "In memory of Jalen. A life that mattered. A future we won't forget." Diego stood off to the side at first, not wanting to make it about him. But people started nodding at him, reaching out to shake his hand, some even hugging him without saying a word. Jalen's parents were there too, and when his mother hugged Diego, it wasn't the kind of hug you give to someone you barely know. It was the kind you give to someone who fought for your child when nobody else did. A teacher from the local school stepped up to a small microphone and thanked Diego, not just for what he tried to do that day, but for what he had done after, for standing up, for speaking out, for refusing to let the story end with silence. Diego finally stepped forward, candle in hand, voice steady but thick with feeling. He looked out over the sea of faces and said, "This wasn't just about saving one life. It was about making sure no one is ever stopped from saving a life again." And as the crowd lowered their candles to the ground, lighting up the court with hundreds of tiny flames, it was clear. This fight had changed more than one neighborhood. It had lit a fire that would keep burning for a long, long time.